thousands of views of it since. So it automatically records it, and then it will play it again, you know, and I'll share it out and all that kind of good stuff. So, but I think it's working now. It'll pop up and say so when it's ready. All right, so we're live. We're here.
You're here. Fantastic.
So good evening from New Hampshire, Mona. And you're all the way in California.
All the way in California.
Is it nice and bright and sunny there?
Different climate. It's sunny.
I know. Well, it's actually been kind of nice here the last few days too, which is it's amazing because we're getting some spring finally. So that's exciting.
It's always beautiful there, I think.
It is. It's just
real weather, real seasons.
Yes. A bit to endure. So I wanted to begin our time together this evening with a little, I want to hear a little bit about your journey to this point. So what I mean by that is tell our audience a bit about why you wrote Beyond Behaviors and what this journey has been for you in the last, is it 3 years? When did you publish the book? 2 years ago?
The book was just about 2 years ago, went by really fast. And then I published another book in 2017.
I remember that one because that was the first one I read and I was like, I love this woman. She gets it.
Yeah, that's my ideas had started consolidating enough for me to put it into words. But the journey, Emily, really started probably 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, after I had stepped away from the field of psychology and went into a subspecialty of infant and toddler development, essentially, because I wanted to go for prevention. I just felt kind of stuck with seeing older kids and wondering how I might have coached their parents if I would have known some of these things when they were toddlers. Because a lot of times things start to crop up, just differences or things you notice as a parent as a toddler. So anyway, once I got that education, and that took a good 3 years, because there I studied brain development. I learned about brain development from the experts in the field through a really great innovative program that was at housed at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. And over 2 years, I was on these multidisciplinary teams and looking at behaviors through the lens of every single discipline and profession possible. So
that sounds so amazing. That's like my ultimate nerd out dream. Oh my gosh.
It was a nerd out dream. It was a dream true, because this innovator, Dr. Connie Lillis, put us together in teams. And then we had these practicums, these placements where we would go to like a public health clinic or hospital and then see a child. And then we would all talk about it from our disciplinary lens. So, but what that means is that I got to learn about what a behavior issue might be coming from the eye of a pediatrician or an occupational therapist, because of like our senses, or a physical therapist for for people who had difficulty with their movement experiences. So the long story short is, after I graduated with 2 infant mental health certificates, I went back into the world as a clinical psychologist in schools, in special education settings, in regular education settings, public schools, IEPs, homes, offices, my regular busy schedule as a child psychologist. And I saw things from a different lens. And I saw things now that shocked me.
Yeah. So what was that you felt like was, because I think you do such a good job of capturing this, even now, like constantly when I see your memes, I'm like, I love Mona. Because I just love that you, and I don't mean this to sound condescending, and I don't know if it does or not, but I'm just like, she so gets it. And that's still a rarity. that people really see things through this neurological, neurologically informed lens. And so what were you encountering? What was the prevailing mindset that you encountered when you would be in an IEP meeting or consulting with a teacher or, someone within the schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so it would be when okay, so from this new lens, an example would be, let's just take a simple example of seclusion.
Yeah.
So before, when I would visit classrooms and children were treated harshly, like they were given a level chart, and if they lost privileges, they had to sit at the back of the classroom, or if they gained privileges, they got to get a certain goodie. I thought, well, that's decent. Makes sense. Life is rough. So,
Right.
but after I had my training, I'll never forget, and the story is in my book of Mateo. After I had my training, I was in a classroom, and a little guy, a neurodivergent student, was having difficulty holding his body still. And so he started to elbow his aide who was sitting by him. And when he elbowed her, she moved further away because she thought that, and was trained that meant he was being disruptive, that he wasn't focusing on the teacher.
Yeah.
But in my head, I was thinking, oh, he can't focus on the teacher. He needs some help. He needs some relational help right there. So anyway, when she moved away, he started going like this and trying to find her with his hand. And that was deemed as further disruption. And then finally she moved behind him so that he couldn't even touch her, because again, through this behavioral lens that she was taught, and she was a marvelous, wonderful, loving person, she was taught, just go behind him, don't let him even see you. And then he fell over. After he fell over, they put him in a calm down room by himself. And that was the moment in my career when I looked inside. So I was just a fly on the wall there, and I looked in the calm down room, and I saw him. She was sitting on the floor, kind of doing her work, and then he was in that calm down room, banging his head against a padded wall. And that's when I realized that I needed to start speaking up, because I loved my cozy little private job as a psychologist. And I'm not, I never thought I'd be doing a lot of, blogging, because I thought this is I don't know. When that happened, Emily, I just realized there are so many Mateos out there in our
Oh
world.
my gosh. Oh my
And they're
gosh,
not just
Mom.
autistic children. There
Yes.
are sensitive children. And
Yes.
so that's after that, because I had met Dr. Porges through my specialization work. After that, I started to blog and to write, and now do it all the time. And I'm
I
so
love
happy.
it.
I'm so happy to do it.
I know. I love that you write, and I love that you make your memes, and I love that you just keep the conversation going. So, and because you just mentioned something that I think is really critical, and it's a critical point in this work, and what I see as being a paradigm shift, like you speak of as well. And it's also part of a movement, really. But part of it is deciding that you're gonna take a stand. And I'm curious to hear a little bit about what has that been like for you, because obviously you're doing that, and you're in sort of a public space doing it, but there are educators in their own school systems attempting to take these stands as well, and feeling really at times sort of overwhelmed or disempowered or invisible or misunderstood. How have you been able to sort of, I suppose, persevere with that kind of pushback? Because I mean, I've followed your work enough to know that it's not all butterflies and roses. People aren't all like, that's great, Mona, we totally agree. I mean, you're still, people are understandably very invested in the training they've had and the things that they've done up to this point. And I get that, because many of us do this work because we have a passion and a love for the children, and we want to make a difference. And so to think that maybe the things that we were doing, that we were trained in, are actually causing harm as opposed to being really beneficial, it's a hard place to be. So I'm kind of curious to hear a little bit about, like, what's that been like for you to persevere and is that hard at times even still?
Mm, very hard,
Mhm.
very hard. And I think that my meeting Kristen Neff a few years ago, self-compassion researcher and compassion researcher. I can't imagine doing this work without doing my own work with compassion and self-compassion, because to be honest with you, you know, like you said, when people have been trained in a certain way and they really believe that is the way to go, and it's in the framework, so it's supported by the school, which is
Yes,
supported by the district, which is
yes,
supported by the education system, right?
yes,
This is a very huge system that
yes,
hasn't had that relational neuroscience, and also this idea that behavioral management is not the main roadway. But when you're trained that it is the highway, there's only one highway, and it's the behavior
right.
management system, it can be tricky. So on a personal level, I remember when I was doing a lot of IEPs, oftentimes when I would come out of an IEP, I would have a splitting headache. So that
Mhm,
is an example of my own
mhm.
nervous system trying really hard to explain. And the teams were they were listening. I'm not saying that everyone was listening to what I had to say. And, but I have to be honest, when I looked out across the room, I saw looks of confusion, like, I'm not sure what you're really talking about, because
Oh
it's a
my
different
God.
language.
Yeah,
So,
I can't even begin to explain to you how much what you're describing I have too experienced many, many, many times. And I experience it as a consultant currently, but I definitely experienced it in the schools when I was trying to still work, in schools with this new kind of paradigm in my mind of how I was interpreting what was happening for students. And it's that feeling of like, okay, I know that there's an earnest spirit here.
yes.
However, we're not speaking the same language.
We're not
Right?
speaking the same language. We barely have a crosswalk to understand each other because it hasn't been built yet.
Right?
So
Right? Oh
yes,
my God, we need the bridge. Where's the bridge?
my heart went out to the students and to the parents, that because they were using this new approach, the approach that I coached them on. They were using it at home and found it to be so better, so much, so useful.
Yeah.
They saw their children be acting way more controlled and having more self-control because they felt safer, and
Yeah.
because they had their environment that was finally really attuned to their nervous system,
Yes. Yeah.
individualized educational plan right at home.
Yeah.
And actually a lot of those same children have done fairly well under COVID because their parents have understand how to help them make friends with befriend their nervous system, as Deb Dana says.
Yeah.
So it is a different language. It was, and it is. I'm still in practice, so it is quite stressful. However, I'd have to say that far, far more people have been so excited about this approach and emailed me and called me, and I have several international supervision groups, so groups of educators who are trying this, like in um, in Italy and Portugal and here in the US, that the support and the resonance way outweighs some of the other naysayers, which understandably um, may have something big to protect, right? Because
Mhm.
they've been trained in a certain way, and behavioral technologies and ABA is a very big business, to be honest.
Yes.
It's a
Yes, it is.
and the people doing that work um, are there to help children too. So
Yeah.
it's been actually, I'd have to say, overall, the reception and the desire to see things from a relational framework has been amazing, because
Mm,
most people, even though they have been trained in a certain way, resonate with the message
mhm.
of this new way of thinking,
Yeah, totally.
if that makes sense. So
Oh
it's
my gosh, it makes complete sense to me. I feel like we're singing the same song, singing the
yeah.
same here. So, I mean, I hear you saying too that part of it is that we are trying to build a bridge. And I think part of that bridge is a bridge that needs to be built between many disciplines and many areas of service. Like, for example, because I too came to this understanding from the clinical world. Even though I wasn't a clinical mental health professional, I sought that kind of training. And when I got that kind of training, I was like, wow, this is so applicable in our schools. And I think that right now, COVID provides us a really robust, fertile soil for exploring new ways of thinking, because it's sort of undeniable that this has been a collective trauma. This whole, the pandemic and all that has come in the aftermath of it has really shaken us as a country, shaken many of us as a globe, right? And
Yeah.
so in some ways, I mean, do you see that as well? Do you feel as though people are even more willing to hear now, or that you do feel that the conversation is even more engaged or more, vibrant?
Vibrant. I absolutely do. And I think it's taken on a new traction that like never before.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
think caregivers, providers, um, teachers, parents, everybody is so has been through trauma
Mhm.
of the pandemic, and it's lasted so long
Yeah.
that there's just an appetite for understanding why we are all feeling so exhausted, so burned
Mhm.
out,
Mhm.
so grasping for normalcy, and
Mhm.
also why how to help kids feel better, and get motivated to learn again and to do school again in maybe a different way. So
Yeah.
the answer is yes. There's so much information seeking out there, and
Yeah.
it's been amazing. This is, I think, if there is one silver lining to going to online training and classes, the Zoom meetings that I have been doing through 2020 skyrocketed
Yeah.
from
Same.
before, because we
Yeah.
can be safe and we can come in through our homes and talk to each other and support each other.
I feel like, it's funny too, because I don't know if you felt this way, but I know that in the beginning, I was like, I can't train virtually. No, that's not like, we need to be in person. Like, this is, we're talking about, like you said, relational connectedness and stuff. Like, I need to be with people. And it's funny how adaptive we are as a species, truly, because I feel like we've actually gotten pretty good at being able to genuinely connect in this technological way, and that there is a resonance that can be transmitted, and do you agree? Do you feel like it's like, maybe initially it felt sort of awkward, or it felt like, I'll speak for myself, it just felt like an artificial substitute that really was that just very, very much, it didn't feel right. But I've my body, I feel like my nervous system has adapted, and I've, tried to kind of adapt how I also talk with people. And I'm very conscious about using my body, when I'm on Zoom, to convey, cues of safety or acceptance or whatnot.
Yes, and you do that so well.
Oh.
Yes, I felt so clumsy in the beginning, and it was like, this is awkward, and it wasn't the preferred way to communicate. Certainly before this, it was always in person was better, but Even our beloved Dr. Porges, the developer of the polyvagal theory, I heard him talking about this the other day, and he said, indeed, humans are adaptive, and you can convey cues of safety through your tone of voice, your facial expression, and he believes that that this online option has been really positive for us humans. So
Yeah.
you're right. I think it shows how adaptive human beings are. That's how we survived for all these millions of years, is through different iterations, different variations of adaptability through climates and global changes over millions of years. But certainly this was one we had to adapt to fast, like almost overnight. That was the crazy part, is that it happened so fast without warning, really.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was intense. It was an intense adjustment for sure. So speaking of Dr. Porges, let's just talk a moment about, because this is sort of like a little teaser for the conference that we're going to have in the spring, June 1st through the 4th. And Mona has graciously accepted as one of our keynotes for that event. And I'm super excited about that. But when you hear this, like, so the conference is about taking the polyvagal and applying it to the many facets of school systems and how schools function. So it is partly about what does that look like in the classroom, but it's also about what might that look like in terms of how our systems function, like our policies, how they're written and how they're described, and procedures that you have, whether that's entering a school building or the habits of a school setting and that sort of thing. So when you hear that, like as a clinical person that definitely wrestles around in the world of education, talk to me a little bit about how that resonates or lands for you.
Well, I'm so excited about the conference, first of all, and thank you for having me. I cannot wait till June 1st.
I know, it's going to be so
2nd,
great.
whatever mine is. And the polyvagal theory is so portable to our different systems, right? It's portable on an environmental level. So for example, teachers and schools often ask about, well, what a kind of accommodation is appropriate for a certain child or for children in general. And the polyvagal theory can help us answer that question, both for maybe the majority of the class, but most importantly for this specific child.
Yeah.
And when we do so I guess, for lack of a better term, I guess I would call it a polyvagal evaluation, right? When I evaluate the nervous system, the sensory systems, the way the child, the student, the teenager takes in the world, I have a kind of a roadmap and a way to answer really important questions. So I think the people that you have coming to the conference are going to give parents and teachers and everybody these tools that will help them form accommodations for students and understand why. So that's on a kind of an educational level. It also on an educational level, this theory can inform everyone from the front office person who greets people coming in the door, answering the phone, the person, the school nurse, right? The vice principal, the counselors, the teachers, the aides, the amazing helpers in the cafeteria. There's something that this way of looking at human beings can add to everyone on the team.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love, for me, it explains so much, like you're describing, explains so much about the human experience and human behavior. And it helps us to reinterpret even our collegial experiences. Because as we know, a lot of times what gets in the way in our school settings is that you have educators in their various roles, whether that's a classroom teacher or a school counselor or a school nurse or a school psychologist or whomever they are doing their job, but they're experiencing a lot of overwhelm, experiencing a lot of frustration for a variety of usually systems reasons. And that's a powerful resonance that they bring right into the work, that if they're not aware of their own nervous system, they haven't befriended that yet, they may not be aware that they unwittingly are defense mobilizing others, or they're experiencing some form of defense mobilization or immobilization. And so for me, I feel like it's also a really helpful lens through which to interpret the way in which a school functions, because there's been a lot of talk in the last 20 years about school culture and school climate. And there's been tons of talk about creating safety in that. But I mean, I don't know if you want to speak to this for a moment, but I think we've really gotten that wrong, because when we think about safety often in schools, what we really are talking about is security or protection, which, is very different from, safe relationships or feeling, having that felt sense of safety. So I don't know if you want to speak to that for a moment.
Yes, everything you said had so many important nuggets on it. The first thing I'll say is that the idea that it's not just about our children, caring for our children's nervous system, but befriending our own
Yeah.
as the main portal. So it's not about teaching our children about their nervous systems. It's first, although that's great, that's a component later on, that's a teacher thing. But before all that, what the theory suggests is that our own grounding in our ventral vagal, our safe calm pathway in our nervous system, is kind of a prerequisite for helping the class feel safe. If we can see that not as a, oh no, another thing to do on my list, right? But actually a mandate for caring for ourselves and
Yeah.
and loving ourselves, and realizing when our burden is too heavy,
Yeah.
and then figuring out the things we can do within our scope, whether it's a breath or taking a day off, right? Taking a personal day off, or anything in between. That magic of understanding that we matter, our sense of emotional regulation is the most important thing that we can take care of for our students and our children and everyone no matter what provider you are, if you're a parent or a teacher or a therapist. So that, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because really that's the most important thing, not our children's nervous systems, although we are going to be tailoring it for them in IEPs, but our own. And that has ramifications for our own relationships, for our significant others, our spouses, right? It really helps us understand relational satisfaction and discord better.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does.
But let me just also talk about what you just said about safety, because I think that's so important. Sometimes when we think about safety systems in schools, we might think about a car seat. Is the child buckled in right? Safety in schools. Do you have appropriate handrails? Are you sure you have surfaces that are non-stick so children won't fall? So that's all great. That's environmental safety on a different level, but it's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
What we're talking about is this sense of safety that human beings have that's highly subjective. So what one person interprets as safe, another person can equally interpret as unsafe. For example, in a typical classroom, in any typical classroom with more than a handful of students in it, most of our classrooms have over 20, you will have children who process auditory information, that is what they hear, on a range from hearing a sound and barely hearing it to feeling like that's completely background noise, I'm not distracted at all, to a child who hears that same noise and goes like this and is looking for the source of the noise, and all of a sudden has to understand what that noise was, so they'll start moving their bodies. That's an example of safety showing itself as differences in body movement in a classroom. The same goes for smell, what you smell. The same goes for the sense of your clothing on your skin. Like if some kids have a certain tag that might be bothering them and they have tactile sensitivities. It goes for how children look at you. So if we add into the mix the idea of so many of our children who have trauma histories of different kinds, you can grow up in a very conventionally safe home and still experience trauma.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of those kids in my practice. Those would be children who experience it either through a medical condition or a sensory processing disorder, for example. That's an invisible trigger, but you're misunderstood. And so if your parents or your teachers don't know what you're reacting to, that can be experienced as very stressful.
Yeah.
So you could develop phobias. So those, you have those kinds of things, but then you also have children, are vulnerable children who have experienced witnessing violence or food insecurity or implicit and explicit bias. So you have, in a given classroom, you'll have all sorts of nervous systems who are struggling to feel safe.
Exactly.
And each one will need their own pathway. And that's, I think, what scares some people, but in education, but I want to say that I get that it sounds super complicated, but the rewards are so high. And once your district or once your school starts to view it through this individualized lens, it becomes easier because then you have a team that's also doing that.
Right. And I think too, that there's pieces where, there's sort of like generalities. Like, so for example, if we have our schools locked down and there are things that we've done, there's protection measures we've put in place in order to keep our kids safe. And it's important to recognize that those kinds of items or measures are likely giving a cue of threat fairly universally to the children. So it's like about, in my view, it's about bringing more conscious intention and awareness to, okay, we recognize there are certain things we may need to do in order to keep our children secure in this building, but what are we also doing to try and temper? What cues are we deliberately cultivating? Recognizing that it's not going to be 100% beneficial or perceived exactly the same way and by all kids or all adults, but you're more likely to get to that safe place than not. Like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I think there's a lot that we do because we don't have this lens. There's a lot that we're doing that we don't realize is unwittingly contributing to defense mobilization. Like, you might actually have a lot less of it. You're always going to have those individual children, like you said, that has sensitized stress response systems. That's not going away. We may have far fewer of those kinds of children to have to help and support than we currently do. And I think that's really important for us to prioritize as we're moving towards a return to in-person learning, Oh,
I could not agree more. I love how you brought in this 3 words that can help us smooth out this transition and help to heal the trauma and the stress. Cues of safety.
Yes.
And hopefully we can unpack this concept more in the conference, because
that's what we're going to be doing.
Because you can say cues of safety and some people will not know what we mean by that. And so you are 100% right. When you realize that some of these things that we have to put in place, let's just give some examples from the past.
Yes.
For example, metal detectors, right? Even masks and hand sanitizers and shields and all this. Those are examples of cues of threat, right? When a
Yes,
child sees that, they pretty much know that there's a reason. If you have a metal detector, what kind of metal are you having to detect?
exactly.
And it's very misconstrued to think that metal detectors would help children feel safer, because the association to a metal detector is a gun, and a gun isn't a safe association. I'm
Right.
not saying that those aren't necessary. I'm just saying that what we want to do is, when you have to have cues of threat, you want to imbue and pile on cues of safety.
See,
Because
Mona, you just make my heart sing.
yeah, this is you've got it. You've got it right on target. You add the cues of safety. You imbue the classroom with cues of safety to offset the cues of threat.
Well, and just I mean, I know that we're way over like our little half-hour chat, but I could just chat with you for hours. But I'm just thinking about like that, when we decide something is really necessary and really a priority, we do seize that and take it and really run with it. And one of the things that I've marveled at is all of the monies that have been spent through this whole crisis on upgrading ventilation systems in many, many schools across the country. And I'm talking millions of dollars. We have our local school district here
Yeah,
saying that the air quality in the school now is better than the outdoor air. And I'm like, we live in the country. Like, wow. Um, but one
you
of the
need
things
that for LA, but you don't need that for New Hampshire.
right. But one of the things that I'm thinking about is just like you mentioned it earlier, which is that just as an example for folks is the auditory stimuli. And I remember saying this in a training in a school once, and people looked at me like, huh? But
Yeah.
one of the things that is under acknowledged, I think people just don't know this, and again, this goes back to polyvagal as well, is just that in any given classroom, there's something like 10 to 20 sources of ambient noise, aside from the children themselves. So everything from that HVAC system to the loudspeaker that comes through to the computers that are humming and running and the go on and on and on. And there are things that we could invest in to try and buffer some of that auditory stimuli, but it's never been a part of our schema. So we just don't think about it, and because some children learn to tolerate it, and the teachers, and to some extent, not all of them, but some of them learn to tolerate it, they think everyone should be able to do that. Well, that's a really big ask of a sensitized nervous system, right? So it's stuff like that where if we can start to really get our systems thinking in this way, there's some even fairly technical things, meaning like technical fixes that are environmental. In fact, Dr. Porges talks a lot about this now, that there's a lot we can do just in the environment of our schools that would supply some of those cues of safety that are much needed.
Oh,
So
that is great.
I know, it's exciting.
It's so exciting. In fact, I think I'll talk about that in my talk. I'll like how we can, all these different ways we can imbue classrooms with cues of safety. And some of
Yes,
them can be super creative and maybe not cost a lot of money. But
right.
I know of a school that got its funding from public sources, but it's a special freestanding a school that is I can't remember what they call them in California, but anyway, it's a special ed school, and they built new classrooms, and they had sound absorption built into the walls.
See?
And
See?
oh my gosh, I don't know what the cost of that was, but I can tell you that when I'm in that classroom, I feel calmer.
Right?
And I really think that something like that can help all children, right? Because we don't realize how much sound bounces off the walls.
Yes.
So the background and foreground, depending on where you're at, unless your back is against the wall, but which, by the way, a lot of children like to sit up against a wall. And some of that is because you can see the sound sources in front of you and they're not bouncing up from behind. So I love your example of where we spend money. And it's great that we'll have fresh air in classrooms, because I'm sure in the summer and in many places that those air filters and those air systems were really cruddy. So that
No,
is
I'm sure they were. I'm sure
that's
they
so
did need an
awesome.
upgrade.
But let's also remember that heaters and air conditioners can be very noisy.
Yeah.
So I have some toddlers that I work with, and when the system turns on, they startle. They look around to see
Yeah.
what that was, and then we'll just say, "Oh, that was the heater turning on. It's okay." And then we use our cues of safety, and then they're like,
Right.
"Oh, okay." And then you start to play. We
Oh,
are.
Mona, I love you. I can literally picture you saying that, and I can picture those little toddlers being like, "Okay,
Okay,
she smiled pretty. This is good." I love it. I love it. I love it. Mona, thank you so, so much for this time. This was just amazing, and I love every time I connect with you. I'm thoroughly energized, and it's just nice. It's just so nice to really feel like I have a friend in all of this, and I appreciate it very much.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for all you are doing to get the word out there about these paradigm shifts, Emily. It's such a joy.
Same, Mona, same.
Awesome.
All right,
All
take good
right.
care. Enjoy your evening in California.
Thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone in June. It's going to be a great conference.
Yes.
Bye
Take care.
now.
Bye.